On today's episode, I speak to the podcaster's podcaster.
Welcome to the podcast.
If you like us, leave a comment below.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel now and make sure you never miss another upload. It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode.
Chatting Tracks
With Rob, the face for Radio Burgess.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Chatting Tracks. Thank you so much for following me over from the 80s Rewind Show podcast. And I can see people have been sharing it on their Facebook pages and letting everybody know about the new show. Thank you so much. It means so much to me. I really, really love you for that. Thank you so much. If you've not done it, like and subscribe. And if you haven't done it on YouTube, please subscribe on there as well because it means a great deal to me. Thank you so much. Love you all. On today's episode, I speak to the fantastic Steve Cooper, who hosts the podcast Cooper Talk. Now, this man's had everyone on there you can imagine, from actors to musicians. There'll be a link in the description. Please follow his show. It's absolutely fantastic. He's a great guy and we had a wonderful chat. We spoke about 80s movies, growing up in the 80s and the importance of comedy records. We had a great time. I hope you enjoy it and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-da. So obviously your podcast covers musicians and comedians and everything in between. Growing up in your house, was it very musical? Was your parents into music?
Well, my dad played saxophone growing up, and I was in a musical house. My brother played drums. My sister played the French horn and the cello, which is the most odd thing. But I always remembered that we had a stereo in our kitchen, and my dad would listen to Guy Lombardo and different jazz. They really didn't listen to rock music, but as a kid, because I'm 59, so when we took trips in the car, there was AM radio. So I'd hear, Sweet Caroline and Tom Jones. In fact, my first two albums were the Partridge Family and a Tom Jones album. But then, so I grew up, the music was always there, but it wasn't in the forefront. I wasn't from a, per se, rock family. I was from a jazz. My parents were older when they had me, so that's what I went through.
Amazing. And so you went into comedy a little bit later. Was you interested in comedians and music at the same time, or was it a different thing? Was you like more music or more comedy?
Well, music, I shared a room with my older brother, and he listened to Chicago, and I remember he had all the Chicago albums, and he had, he listened to all these great albums. And at one point, he had Cheech and Chong's wedding album, which I interviewed Tommy Chong a few months ago, and it was funny because he talked for like an hour and 45 minutes. He was getting stoned, and it really caught me, but I loved them both. I really loved music and comedy. And I knew, though, as I got older, I took guitar lab in high school and I sucked. I couldn't even play. Like in my head, I would hear like, do, and then I go, wait, I couldn't play it. So I had a love for both. But, the way I got into comedy is when I was in college, when I was a freshman, and I was big into the 80s, and this is 80s show. I loved all the, Billy Idol, all that. But Rick Springfield, I used to do a Rick Springfield, Jesse's Girl air guitar. And my freshman year, I used to hang out with a senior we called Ziggy, and he played guitar, and they called him Ziggy, like Ziggy Stardust. He had curly hair, big man on campus. He liked me because I made him laugh. And they had this contest at my school. I went to Stockton State University in South Jersey, which now is Richard Stockton University. And they had a contest called Mr. Stockton, and it was a spoof of like Miss America's. But these guys were serious. So there was all these buff dudes that get body, the body contest and that. And for talent, they said, dude, and I, at that time, I thought maybe eventually I'll get into comedy, but I didn't know. I was going to school for business. I didn't know. But they said, dude, you got to do this. And they said, do a Rick Springfield air guitar. So I said, all right. So my buddy get guitar. We put Springfield on the back. I had picks. I wrote my name on it. I had like the 80s outfit. And I remember I got on the news. I got in the paper. I took second. And I went on stage and I was doing Jesse's Girl. And I was killing it, man. And people from college still remember me for that. I mean, at my wedding, I got married for my second time 4 years ago. I had the DJ play that. My friends were dying. But it was amazing. Being on stage was amazing. And all these senior girls hitting on me and all these women. I was like, oh my God, this is the best. And that ended up getting my taste of entertaining. But I knew I sucked at music, so I could never be a musician. So when I got out of college, like a year later, I was selling fax machines, which are like, they don't make them anymore. And I started doing open mics in Philly. I took a class how to get me into comedy, and I started doing comedy that way.
So what did you find harder originally? Was it music or comedy to do first? Which one did you find harder to?
Well, I didn't do music because I sucked at it. So, I would love to, but comedy, comedy's the difference between comedy and music. And I talked to a lot of musicians about this. If you're a musician, And it's different in England. I've heard like hell stories of gigs in England, how like Gary Newman told me how when he came back big, people hated him because he was popular. And he's like, he said people are very mean when you get success. Like the people at the corner pub are like, oh, this guy's a jerk now. He's too big for us. But the thing about music is musicians go on stage and people are there. They don't have to prove themselves. You go to a show, unless you're an opener, you go up, you play your songs. If you're popular, people know your songs, especially the best big research of 80s bands. Comedy, a lot of people go in the attitude, a lot go to laugh, but a lot of them go into, hey, make me laugh. And so it's hard that way for the fact that, there's nights where you just bomb. You had to sit there and get back up. The thing is, you'll learn that, if you don't bomb, you shouldn't bomb a lot. I mean, I would bomb once every 10 shows, or maybe more. I was consistent, but I knew my audiences. But comedy, once you get into it, it's not hard. It's just anything. I think any art, it's just getting to that step where you go on stage and you're going to kick ass.
Do you think bombing is an important part of the process? Like musicians with failed gigs, do you think that's just as important?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first time I ever did comedy, I did an open mic. And I did great. And I was 23 or 24. And you have that young brashness. And you're like, oh, I'm great. You're like, next week I'm going to be headlining this club. Now, you have no idea what it takes years to get to that point. So you go up and you're cocky. And I'm walking out of the club full of myself, And then I come back on the next week and I die. And I just die. And I didn't come back for like 6 weeks to the open mics because you feel humiliated. But you sit there and go, it's going to happen. I mean, you have to know. It's like anything, and then even as you work, you play bad gigs where you're just there for the money. You're playing in like some hillbilly town in West Virginia and you're going, I'm going to eat it. They're not going to get me, but you have to stay true to the craft. And that's what I love about a lot of musicians. The 80s musicians, they stay true to their craft and they keep bringing it.
That's what I think is interesting about comedy and music, the mix together. When you get a good sort of Tenacious D band that can cross over, that's amazing. But prior to that, you would get vinyl albums of comedians' sets, wouldn't you? You'd get like Steve Martin live in LA or something. You just didn't get that in any other field or career.
It was great. Yeah, the Steve Martin albums, that and the Eddie Murphy album for people my age, for comics, the Eddie Murphy and the Richard Pryors, and there were concerts. Carlin did some more stuff in studio and they did it, but it's like the live album. You're doing, but the difference is when a comedian does a live album or any album, that material's gone. He can do it for like a year, but you can do musicians, of course, as we see, people can play the same song for 50, 60, whatever years, and which they do, and you still enjoy it. But with comedy, I think once you've heard the joke, you've laughed. It's a difference when you laugh or something, but when you listen to a good song, I mean, I can sit there and I'll sit in my living room and I'll have a few beers and I get Amazon Music Unlimited. So I have everything I want on Alexa. And I'll just go, I'll play the outfield or play this song or whatever I'm in the mood for. You can listen to songs and they take you back in time. Music takes you back in time. Comedy doesn't really take you back in time. Comedy makes you laugh, but most people forget comedy bits. I mean, I worked with a comic a few weeks ago and he was on Letterman a few times when he's in town, I open for him. And I don't perform a lot, but I always open for him. And they're always like, it was a City Winery, great gigs. But I can't name his act. I know he does a Rocky impression, but I can't. But with music, you go, oh my God, you remember it.
What's interesting in England at the minute, I don't know if it's the same in the States, but I've seen tribute artists of comedians popping up that are doing like their famous DVD or album, and people are paying to go and see that. And I don't know why people don't just put the original one on.
It's funny. I know one guy who does that, but it's a tribute to Robin Williams, who has passed. He has Robin Williams down to, it's perfect. The guy his name's Roger Cabler, and it's great. But in America, that doesn't really fly because, people don't. I wouldn't go see you're not doing your act. I mean, it's different if it's like I said, Robin Williams or like a Henny Youngman or someone who's passed, or a Kinnison. But even then, you're like, you know what? I could just go watch a video of Kinnison. I'm not going to pay my money to go see someone tell jokes I already know, which is different because we'll go to see cover bands. But once again, the music, growing up in New Jersey, or going to the Jersey Shore, I probably heard Brown Eyed Girl by so many people. Anywhere you go, they play that. My friend's in a big cover band I went to college with down the shore, and I went to see him. Drove down there, and I was like, I know what he's playing, but you still enjoy it. You're like, oh, Springsteen. I'm from New Jersey. Oh, Springsteen. Well, listen. But with the comedy, I couldn't do that because for me, first of all, I don't watch comedy. I don't go to comedy clubs. My wife went to a comedy club with her friends because I probably in my life I've done over 2,500 shows, and I don't find fun. I find fun when I did it more hanging out with comics backstage or going out after. But I really don't like to watch comedy because there's no reason. There's no. I mean, yeah, you can support your friends, but we're performers.
I worked in a theatre years ago, and there was we had 4 comedians on. They sort of did like a triple bill type thing, and in the middle I had to take them some drinks in the dressing room, and I went down there and they were selling jokes around the table to each other, and that was funnier than the show.
Well, it's funny also, if you ever get in a room of comics, and I had a party, if you ever get in a room of comics, they stand up as they talk because we're so used to telling a joke. So if you ever notice that, if you ever happen to be in a room with comics and they start talking louder. And funny thing is, because a lot of us are introverts. Like when we go out, we're not like, hey, we're the life of the party, because the ones who ever did that were the comics that suck. You go to a gig and someone will come in like, hey, we're the comedians. And meanwhile, I'm trying to work on my act and this guy's trying to get laid. And I'm like, no, dude, I don't want to talk. I always looked at comedy when it was my job. It was my job. I didn't drink before I went on stage. I didn't do anything. It was to go up because people paid good money. So that's what I do now. I don't screw around. I talk with the crowd, but I've learned when I perform, people paid money. And it's not like the economy in America is great right now. So people paid their money. Like when I was at City Winery in Philadelphia, people drove over the bridge. They paid whatever, they bought their drinks. They got a babysitter. You can't go up drunk. You can't be like, you have to go up because it's entertainment. Look how pissed we get if a band goes on stage and they're wasted. Guns N' Roses were notorious for that back in the day. You go and like, wait, I can't even understand a word this guy's saying. Or, like the Sex Pistols when they walked off. It's like, no, we paid our money. And it's funny, it just happened down in Atlantic City. There was a double header concert. It was Missing Persons, which I've interviewed Dale Bosio, and she started crying about Frank Zappa. Very interesting woman, very great stories. They canceled. So it was just Flock of Seagulls. But it was only Mike Score and a guitarist. I've interviewed Mike, and Mike's a great guy. But they only played for like 45 minutes. And people are like, wait a second. Because I think casino shows are shorter. But it's like, wait, I paid more money. I ran 52 times. I don't care. I paid whatever, $85. I want to see a show. And that's the thing people don't get. It's with music, they got to put on a good show.
Do you sort of understand what sort of comedian you are when you get into this world? Or is there sort of like, that person's alternative, that person's family friendly? Do you sort of develop into what you are? Or do people automatically slot into those roles when they start comedy, do you think?
You develop. Okay, when I started doing comedy, I started doing it. And then I started doing a character called Steve the Stud. And I would pull my shoulders back. I'd go, hey, you psych. And before any like Urkel and all those people, and I wear a little bow tie and I pull my pants up, and it got me comfortable, but I was writing good material for it. But then you get tired of that. So you develop. Like I was away from the game for a while, and then I was in LA, I was doing it. But now after all these years, when I come back, I don't care anymore. So you find your voice. And I think so. People develop. You see people. George Carlin's the main example. He started up as a hippie weatherman, and then he had to change it. So I think, there are some people that will be pigeonholed in their whole career, like Stephen Wright, who does the model, the series. You're not going to always see Stephen Wright going up and going, "Hey, what's up, people?" It's not going to happen. But I think a lot of times when you're young, it's like anything in life. We develop, and you develop, and your writing style, I think, stays a lot the same, but how you develop and how you look at it, you go into more storytelling. Because the bottom line is, I always tell people this, comedians, and I think all entertainers, are the worst mix because we're insecure, part insecure, but we're part narcissistic, which doesn't make sense. But we sit there, we need that, but then we're worried, and so, as you get to deal with that, you get to a point where I know if I write a joke, if it's funny or not, if it's funny to me, and I'll do it. But I do on Facebook, I do these stupid jokes all the time, and I do them as a joke, and at the end I say, I'll see myself out. And people know it, but people don't get is I would never do them on stage, but I enjoy that. But I think it's like anything, a lawyer will develop. You see people going from defense attorney to, prosecutor or anything, or as you call it, barristers, right? Is that what it's called, a barrister? Yeah. And they wear the wigs. I saw a great show on Showtime about that big bank robbery a few years ago with the MMA fighter. And they kept saying barristers. But I think it's like anything. As you develop, as you get older, or as you just do it more, you get better. I mean, when a baseball player comes for the first time, he's not going to hit, how many feet. But as you do it and as you grow and you mature, I think your voice can change.
What I love about comedy, particularly American comedy, is it falls into two categories, really, for me. There's the aeroplane level, which is amazingly brilliant, and your Naked Guns and your obvious comedy. And then you've got, like you mentioned, Stephen Wright, who I think is a complete genius. I think he's amazing. And I love the way you've got that sort of left and right, top and bottom, and the middle sort of stuff is okay, but it doesn't float, if you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, it's funny. Airplane is one of those classic movies. Animal House, Caddyshack, that's stuff I grew up on, man. It's like those were the movies. I mean, I can still watch Animal House and laugh. I can still watch Airplane. In fact, I had can't think of her name. She was on the Love Boat, and she was in Airplane, and she's the girl who's laying there when the nurse hits the IV with her guitar.
All right.
Jill Whelan, that's her name, and she played a little girl in a Love Boat. But, we talked about this, how that movie, if you watch it, it's just always funny. Yeah. I mean, and it's stupid. Even, like there's a movie called Scary Movie. And here's how I break up movies that come. Scary Movie, you know what? 75% of the jokes hit. But there's jokes every minute. But then you watch something like Something About Mary, where it's not jokes every minute, but every joke hits it. And that's what's good about American comedy. You either have the rapid fire, blah, 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 which Stephen Wright did in his act, or the joke like Kinnison was big before he passed, is like Something About Mary. Set up, boom. And that's what I think what's great. And that's what's great about comedy, that you can be so subjective. I mean, I love Woody Allen's comedy. Woody Allen's very dry, just very, but if you break his jokes down, they're sort of simple and dumb.
Yeah.
But they're funny, like in Take the Money and Run, his teacher goes, he wasn't good at the cello, he tried to blow into it. To me, that's a funny joke. But when you break it down, it's just the visual, and that's what's great about comedy. Some people just try to be, now there's people who try to be shock comedy. And you know what? It's not shock comedy, because everyone's doing it, and it's just a matter of this. I love the stupid comedy, but now clubs, people don't get the stupid comedy. There's a guy in Philadelphia named the legendary Wid. Been around forever. He's a prop act. All this props all over the stage. But his writing, it's so stupid, it's so funny. I opened for him when I came visit my wife, when I would fly in from LA. And I was dying. Because it's so dumb, but it's so rapid fire, and he's so frantic. But now, I mean, if he started doing comedy now, people would be like, what's that? Because, some people are trying to, America's at the point where people are trying to be too hip. But they don't get it. It's like I always say, like when punk rock was big, you have kids walking around from the suburbs with anarchy in the UK, and it's like you live in the suburbs of Philadelphia. There's no anarchy. It's like it's funny because it's like that today. You probably see it with all the bands and the T-shirts. You see kids with all like the Nirvana T-shirts. And you're like, do you know any song? No, I like the logo. It's like, well, come on.
I know exactly what you mean. Like, especially in England, when the punks came out, you had the people with the pins, and it was the Sun newspaper's guide to being a punk, and they'd all just read it. It's amazing. It's a shame that comedy, like growing up, my mum used to take me around her friend's house, and she had Young Frankenstein, The Jerk, Man with Two Brains and Blazing Saddles on video, and I used to watch them every time I went around there. And they, you know, these amazing films could not get made today, and it's just because they're so subversive, but not subversive at all. You know.
Oh yeah, you know, I actually I just watched The Jerk a few weeks ago. I was sitting there and it's like anything. You flip around, you're bored. No way in hell would it get. Blazing Saddles, no way in hell would get made. But the funny thing is, if you break it down, you know, Blazing Saddles was made by a Jewish man. You know, it's not like he's some racist. You know, Mel Brooks is a genius. Young Frankenstein, and just, you know, I think that's going to pass. That's funny because when I work with my friend Joe Matarese, the guy I was at City Winery with, we're very lucky because we have the same crowd. We packed the place. We had 300 people there. Like 70 came to see me, a bunch came to see him, and then people just came up for comedy. But we know we get the 40 years and up, Jewish, Italian, South Jersey, where we grew up, and Philadelphia. No one gets offended. No one, they go out to laugh. And I think the offending, it's people, I think they just do it to feel important. You know, there was a guy who was like trying to find people's tweets from 8 years ago. Well, don't you have anything better to do 8 years from 8 years? Like, you're going to go through tweets. I don't even know how to look at tweets I did like a year ago. I don't even know. I mean, Facebook, I don't see when it pops up Facebook memory, so I know it. But I'm thinking, how much time do you have? Like, get a life. You know, maybe instead of doing that, why don't you go watch a classic comic? Yeah, it was a different time. Comedy was different. You look back at the old Pryor stuff. That's not fly now. Hell, there was Def Comedy Jam. There was, you know, there was all different things. And back in the day, you know, yeah, I mean, I did a bit about downtown Julie Brown on MTV, and I forgot all about the bit. And a young comic, when I started, he was 15, and he was from the hood in Philly, young black guy, Ronnie Lum, sent me a message on Facebook like 3 years ago. He goes, remember that bit? And this is someone who was African-American. He's like, that was so funny. I forgot about it because I basically said, you know, Julie Brown, she talks, you know, this next video. And I thought she'd be like, oh yeah, this next video is crazy and shit. And he thought it was funny. And I used to do a bit about Chris Rock, how Chris Rock, his bits are very long. I said, Chris Rock, you know, just because he, Emma, I did that. And then my old line was, have you ever seen a brother eat guacamole? Nothing racist. But some guy goes, I think that's racist. I go, how is that racist? I said, I had a party. I had a few African Americans. I texted them the next day, did you have the guacamole? They said, nah, we didn't eat it. So my joke was, he never seen them. And I didn't. I was at a party. I had a party. I didn't see any of my black friends eat the guacamole. Nothing. And I could have said, you know, I didn't see any Gentiles eat the guacamole, but the Gentiles were eating the guacamole. Jews were eating the guacamole. It was a joke, but people find stuff just to get offended. And it's so sad. It's like, you know, there are things that are offensive. And I'm someone who believes in free speech. But I also believe in, if you say something stupid, pay the consequences. But a joke from 8 years ago, like when Kevin Hart backed out of the Oscars, he wrote it 8 years ago. You know, you think about us, like, we're both bald. 10 years ago, we had hair. You know, it's like people change, and people don't understand that. But there's these people that just stick to it all. You know, I'm like, you don't have to find it out. People will put their foot in their mouth, but everyone's got to chill out because comedy's just come. And you know, you watch The Jerk, you're going to laugh.
Yeah,
it's all just. I mean, and you laugh, and that's Animal House couldn't get. I had saw someone wrote an article how, and I'm a big John Hughes fan, 80s movies I love. They were dissecting 16 Candles. How it was awful that, you know, Anthony Michael Hall had sex with that girl when she was drunk and all this. And it's like, and then Long Duck Dahmer, that would never fly now. But it was the 80s, man. I mean, I went to college in the 80s. I went to high school in the 80s. I know what the 80s are like firsthand. And the funny thing is, a lot of the shit that's happening now wasn't happening in the 80s. I mean, you know, like the date rape. We didn't do that stuff. You know, we didn't. Yeah, I mean, we always say glad there's no, you know, social media back then because there's some incriminating pictures of all of us. But I think the 80s, I was talking, you ever heard of a movie called Valley Girl?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I interviewed Deborah Foreman years ago. And we were talking, and we said, I came up to the conclusion, and she agreed with me, that the 80s, there was no political correctness because none of us were jerks. You know, we had manners. Yeah, did we party? Yeah, but, you know, and now it's like they're looking at the 80s stuff, and it was a different time. look, you have electric cars now. Years ago, you had bicycles. So it's just funny how with comedy, people get offended, but it's like things have changed. But funny is funny. I mean, you cannot, if you watch The Jerk or Animal House and you don't laugh, there's a problem. Because that's funny stuff.
I mean, the Opti-Grab is amazing. I mean, as well as that, it's sort of, it started dangerous when you've got like Eddie Murphy back in the day as well. And it's kind of softened as it's got on, which is the worst part. You figured it would get worse.
Eddie Murphy could have never have done the album he did now, because there is language, and not language, there's certain, words. There's one whole sketch about gay people, and it has a very derogatory term, a term I do hate, but now he wouldn't do that now. But back then, it's funny. People, I was at this guy's birthday party who grew up in my neighborhood. We call him Goofy Goffinet. Well, he had a fake guy, and he had a very hard life, but he was a good guy. And we surprised him for his birthday party. And we were talking to, I was talking to this guy who was a pipe fitter, rough and tumble guy, real nice guy. And we talked about this one neighborhood that became very upgraded when it became 80% gay, which that's what happens. The restaurants get better. And it's great. But he said, not the whole F word, but he said, but he wasn't doing it meanly. It was just what he knew. And he was saying, oh, it was great when the such and suches came in, and he didn't use the OTS, but he said it's such, and some people just don't know better, and it's not hateful. And that's like with comedy, sometimes it's like anything. People are going to be hateful, people aren't. And you can break it down, musically, lyrics too. People can have very mean lyrics. People can have good lyrics talking about the same thing.
It's crazy as well, like when you've got age divergence, when you've got, like my friend, he's the same age as me, so he's 45, and we were in work, and there's a load of 20-year-olds that work there, and they walked past, and he just said to one of them, "Hello, trouble," which is just an English expression, "Hello, trouble, you're right," as in you're right. And she turned around and said, "You can't say that to me, that's offensive." And he was like, "What?" She said, "How do you know I'm trouble?" He's like, "I'm not." It's just...
There's no common sense anymore, and I think it's. Yeah, I had I knew a bartender's like, "Hey, little girls, joking around. We're not little girls." He's like, "It's a joke." I do it because I do it on my podcast. People where I go, I say guys a lot, and I don't mean like if I'm a group of people, okay, guys. I don't mean like, and some people are like, "Oh, we're girls." I'm like, well, it's. I'm not making fun of you. It's don't take it so literal. I'm saying, hey, guys, and now, it's funny. People take everything so literal, and it's like, no, someone says, if someone comes and calls me Baldy, I'm not going to be offended, but you're not going to walk into a bar and they're not going to go, "Hey, Baldy," unless you know you. But it's, it's like with the trouble thing. It's just a term. There's something called slang or something called term. It's not like he said, "Hello, bitch." No, he said, "Hello, trouble." Oh, okay. Well, I wouldn't be offended by that. But I've learned people just get offended by everything. And I think it's social media. And I especially in America, there's a division in politics. I'm an independent. I don't get involved with it. But I remember years ago, I had a friend who was from England. We called him English Dave, actually. He was from London. He was very liberal. And I had a friend, Dean, who was very conservative. We'd be at my place, and we'd be drinking and partying, and they would start talking politics. But they'd respect each other. And they listen to each other. And it was fascinating to me to hear them. And at the end, maybe one says, "Well, you sort of have a point." But now everything's the where people just, you know how it is on Facebook. "Oh, or you're stupid." Well, I grew up where if you went to a bar and you're talking to someone and you said, "You're stupid," you probably get punched in the face. It's true though. It's like people just say it. I got in an argument with this guy when I made a joke about COVID. And I said, it's unbelievable that some people believe in Bigfoot, but they don't believe in COVID. Nothing political about that. Nothing. So some guy goes on a tangent, starting stuff with my friends. So I unfriend him. So then I get a message from him. "Hey, comrade, you and your Hollywood wannabes." Well, I live in New Jersey. I said, "You live in Hollywood." And I know half of Hollywood. So no. And he put this thing, and he was all mad because I unfriended him. And I'm like, dude, people take everything so serious now. And, that's why I don't post anything even a little bit political, because people just start saying stuff. Then you'll go, "Well, that has nothing to do with a joke." "Oh, I guess you're right." So it's America's crazy. Now, I don't know how it is over in England, but America's just nuts. Like I don't even pay attention. My wife's very liberal. I know I'm independent, but people just get so heated. You can't even make a joke anymore. And I know a lot of people, I know right-wing comics off stage, but they're professionals where they go, when I go on stage, I am not going to talk about politics. Because like I said earlier, people pay money to go. So if you start talking about this and you're pissing off half the people, they're not having fun. But that's what it is. Let's keep it for social media. But there are people who just go for that crowd and they forget. If you're a hardcore right comic or a hardcore left comic, you're losing 50% of your crowd. And the whole idea of entertaining is to get asses in the seat and make it laugh, because it's a lot easier to make 300 people laugh than 25 people.
That's absolutely true. So around 1980, I would have been 5 or 6. And growing up, my version of America in the 80s was through films like Wall Street and Valley Girl and The Joke, and John Hughes being the big one. Was it like that growing up in America? Was it all sunny shines and money and all that sort of stuff?
I think it depends where you lived. Okay, I grew up, as I said, in a nice town. My parents were my mom was from immigrants, and my dad was, second generation English German. My mom was Austrian Yugoslavian, and they wanted us to have a better life. They had good lives. So they worked, and they put us in a nice suburb. Outside, 10 minutes, 15 minutes outside Philadelphia. Nice area. I got to live the Breakfast Club. I got to live that. It was like that. But what's funny is people don't know is the influence of England on us. Because I still remember when Duran Duran got big and I had hair. I took a picture. This is no lie. I took a picture to the hair salon my mom took me to. It was this lady, Phyllis. I remember she's a big, heavy lady with curly black hair. And I took a picture of Simon Le Bon. And I said, I want my hair like that. And they're like, oh, look how handsome Simon Le Bon is. Like, oh, I'm not great. But it was, The Breakfast Club, great movie. I graduated high school in 82. I think The Breakfast Club came out in 82 or 83. But we all identify with that. In our high schools, they call them sporters. We had jobs, the athletes. We had the outcasts. We called them freaks. You can't ever call them now because they're all smoking pot. And everyone smoked pot in high school, but they were always out, freaks. And then we had the discos. They were the guys who liked disco. And there was the groups. So it was a lot. It was a lot like that. Like if you watch 16 Candles, I went to parties like that. Now, given I grew up on the East Coast, Valley Girl took on the West Coast. So where LA was like that. But in Middle America, they really didn't get that. I mean, they may have, but it was different. That's why we saw a movie like Footloose. They couldn't dance in Middle America, but a lot of it was, we did live that, looking back. And in America, 80s stuff influenced it. When Miami Vice came back, all of us wanted to get those Don Johnson look. We didn't shave. And so, yeah, those 80 movies are pretty on. I mean, of course, they exaggerate like anything, but I mean, the John Hughes movies, they just hit you, and there is the division, like Some Kind of Wonderful and stuff like that. But yeah, they were getting Breakfast Club. Everyone I know relates to. That is my age. And, Don't You Forget About Me, which is funny when we talk about music in the 80s. I had Pretty in Pink was and I used to have the James Spader hair. So whenever sees pictures of me, they go, why were you in a John Hughes movie, Cooper? And I had Andy McCluskey from O&D on my show. And I asked him about If You Leave in the song from Pretty in Pink. And for me, if that movie came out in 85 and we were leaving college, and that meant a lot to us because it wasn't now with social media. And the funny thing is, Andy told me is they wrote that song in like one day because they had another song placed in Pretty in Pink. And in the original Pretty in Pink, Ducky was supposed to get Molly Ringwald, not Andrew McCarthy. But the people tested it and said, we don't want Ducky to get her. So the song they had didn't match with the dancing, and they did it. But that's why for like those movies, the music was so important too, because I just had we had a reunion at my college and we stayed overnight and everything. And you talk about music in those movies. I mean, they really shaped us. And because we did live that, at a certain age. As I said, I was in the middle. I was in college, and when those movies were coming out. So yeah, they hit spot on. John Hughes is brilliant, man. That guy, and and people forget he wrote the Vacation movie. Which is funny. They're funny ass movies. Christmas Vacation is hysterical, but he really hit the part, and I have a friend who was in Breakfast Club who played the janitor, and
Wow.
he said, John Kapelos, he's done my podcast. If you like 80s stuff, here's a story. We did a live version of my podcast, Cooper Talk. I had John Kapelos from the Breakfast Club in a coffee shop owned by Damone from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He owned the coffee shop. And John Kapelos said, like, when he got that part, he was also on 16 Candles. He was the hairy bull hunk, the thing. But his part wasn't supposed to be that big, but he got the part, and it changed his life, because those movies, it's funny, none of them did huge at the box office, but when they started getting on cable and VHS, then they just blew up. So for people my age, that was a big foundation for us, because, and the music, because we listened to like Bowie and stuff like that, but that was our older brothers. And those movies, like even the Woody Allen movies, you really didn't get. But when John Hughes movies came out, it was just, oh my God, like that's us. Like that's that guy. We know a guy like Bender on Breakfast Club. We know, I grew up in a town where we had a lot of Molly Ringwald types, like the stuck-up girls whose parents bought them. I would take my mom's car to school every once in a while, or I'd drive with my brother when I was a freshman. He was a senior. But there was, our parking lot was full of red Camaros and all those things. And it was just those movies really hit, this show is about the 80s, and those really hit they really hit us. And they do, looking back now, it's still, you can remember those lines and the lines from the movie, and it was a special time for us.
My favourite bit in the Breakfast Club, and I don't know what it means to this day, is when the headmaster's walking around and then he looks in the mirror and he goes, "Hugga-dugga."
I don't know what that means either. I think it must be a line from the movie. And if the funny thing about the Breakfast Club, and this is one thing that irritates me about the Breakfast Club, Judd Nelson's crawling through the air ducts. and he tells a joke, but he falls before the punchline. I never knew what the punchline to that joke was. And I tried to get Judd Nelson on my show, and I haven't been able to get that punchline. But that was, I'm like, what was the punchline? It's like, and the music, and he falls right through. So there's a lot of stuff, once again, that was taking place in Chicago. So in America, there's different lingo everywhere. So there was stuff that maybe Chicago, I was just in Buffalo visiting people, and they call soda, which we call soda, they call it pop. Like a size of get pop. And then they do that in the Midwest. So there's a lot of language to that in Chicago. Probably didn't translate to us because, we have a lot of the Philly people like "use guys" instead of "you guys," or "come on." It's just so there's probably something in that movie that I missed, but if you were from Chicago, you really, really got, because that all took place in Chicago.
What's nice as well is you had a mix of the music and the films, and they were both just as good as each other, and it wasn't taken separately. Like if a song was from a film and it was in the charts, it wasn't like, oh, that's the film from that song. It was like, oh, that's "Don't You Forget About Me" by Simple Minds.
Flashdance. Flashdance, Irene and Michael Zambello, Maniac, those songs. Exactly. You didn't sit there and go, well, Flashdance, the song was Flashdance, but you didn't think of the movie. There was a great movie, I don't know if you ever saw, Vision Quest. And it was Matthew Modine was a wrestler. And that soundtrack, it had Madonna singing "Crazy About You," Red Rider singing "Lunatic Fringe." There was all these great songs. And you didn't sit there and go, when you remember Valley Girl, the Plimsouls, "A Million Miles Away." You hear them and you think of the movie, but you also think, well, no, that's the Plimsouls. And it's very interesting.
Yeah, like Psychedelic Furs and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you just know it. Yeah.
I met with you, Robbie. I interviewed Robbie from Modern English, and they didn't even know the movie. They didn't even know the song was in the movie. Like, he was an American. Someone said, check this out. And it was a huge part of the movie. But back then, the music industry screwed everybody. The film companies still do. But they didn't know. But those movies, the soundtrack was so important in the 80s. The soundtrack to movies, but you're right. You thought of it as a sound. You would listen to the soundtrack. You didn't have to, and you wouldn't think about the movie. You go, God, like the Pretty in Pink soundtrack's amazing. You go, God, this is great music.
You've got an amazing podcast called Cooper Talk. Can we just sort of discover how that started and why you got into that?
Yeah, it was 11 or 12 years ago. I was living in LA, and when you're in LA, you're hustling, and I was doing corporate restaurant marketing. And this guy I met at an event had an internet radio station, and someone said, "Oh, Cooper would be really good for a show." He goes, "You want to do a show?" I said, "All right." And they only played indie music, so I go, "Yeah, but I want to do an 80s show." And he goes, "Well, we don't have the license for that, so we have to pay independent bands. I said, but I want to do talk too. He goes, okay, you can do half talk, half music. So I was still doing some comedy, so I was getting comics I knew to come on and we talk, and I really enjoyed it. But then all of a sudden on the internet station, he texted me one day and he goes, man, he goes, a ton of people are listening. You got really good numbers. And he goes, you can do all talk if you want. So I said, all right. So I had an hour slot. And that's where I learned to interview, because I had never interviewed anyone in my life. I'd never done it. But I knew, how to listen, and just, one thing is with my interviews, I don't plan anything. I have my research. I don't write anything out because I don't want it to be like this and that. But I started doing it. And then people would come into the studio. And I remember Paul Tompkins is a big comic, underground comic I know from Philly. He came in. Cato Kalin, if you don't know, he was the guy with OJ. I met him in a couple OJ's house guests. He came in. And I just started getting guests. And then all of a sudden I started reaching out to people on Facebook. And a guy, Robbie Benson, was a big heartthrob in America, movie Ice Castles or 101. He said he'd do it. So I was like, cool. So once you get, it's like a drug. Once you get that one hit, you're like, oh man, this is great. So I just kept getting guests. I just kept building. And then I would get these actors and drummers that no one was asking for, especially the actors. No one asked for these actors. I had Amanda Weiss from Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Better Off Dead. And they'd come in and they'd have fun. And they say to someone, oh, Steve's a really good guy. You'll like it. So they'd come in the studio. I'd had Asner come in. I got him because some guy I had was the same PR person. And I said, who else do you handle? He says, that Asner. I said, can I have that Asner? He goes, yeah. So I learned, it started building. And then when the studio closed, I started getting a lot of musicians. And I remember I was a big fan, and I don't know if you heard of them. There's a big band from Philly called the Hooters. And they had a big album. They just toured Europe. They're very huge in Germany. And I got them on. I became friends with the drummer. And then I met this Jason Aldean's drummer, and he got me people. So it just started snowballing. And when you start getting a list of people, you aim high. Not people. I mean, I got Steven Van Zandt off of one email. But then also some people say they'll do it, and you get burned a lot. I had some people say they'll do it, and I never hear back from them. I had someone from a band I'm not going to say, like, I'll do it. Set it up, never showed up. And then never respond when I do it. I know things happen. So I just started building it. I was persistent, and I love interviews. I would just get on and I would talk to these people. And it's like anything in the business world and any world. If you're good at what you do and you know how to network, and and as I said, and if you're not like a fanboy, if you talk to these people, because what I've learned is I have 966 episodes posted. Now I've done more before that aren't on my site because they were just people. There were a local comic in Philly, in LA or whatever, but none of them, and this is God honest truth, not one has been a jerk. And I'm going to tell you, man, I've interviewed some big 80s people. Jack Hughes from Langtron was the nicest guy. The late Tony Lewis from the outfield, so nice. And, a lot of John Waite. John Waite was phenomenal. And he wasn't doing a lot of interviews. I don't know if he heard my show, but I emailed him. He said, I want to do it. And then he was in town. I interviewed him 2.5 years ago. He was in town a few weeks ago. And I emailed him. I said, the hell with it. I said, hey, I told him, I said, listen, my mom said, the worst thing you do by asking is get a no. I said, can you put me on the guest list? And he did. Same with Dave Wakeling. Dave Wakeling, fun, so nice. And these are people that, tenderness. I got married 4 years ago. I had that on my soundtrack. When I picked up songs. And the guys, Andy McCluskey from O&D. And I've just been lucky, and I tell a lot of younger podcasters, I said, you got to deliver, and a lot of guys are afraid to, well, how did you get this guest? I go, well, they go, okay, there's a guy. Do you know the show Better Call Saul? Is that in England?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a blonde guy, Patrick Fabian. After the second season, I thought he was great. I asked the actor, I said, do you know Patrick Fabian? He goes, yeah. I goes, can you get him on my show? He goes, let me find out. Like half an hour later, Patrick calls me. Yeah, I'd love to do it. All right. So he comes in studio. We have a blast. He's from about 2 hours where I grew up. So then all of a sudden, Better Call Saul keeps getting bigger and bigger. So after season 5, I have his phone number, but I don't want to text him because I haven't talked to him in like 4 years. So I sent him a message on Facebook. And I say, hey, Patrick, it's Steve, I'd love you to come back on. I didn't want to text you. And he goes, Coop, text away. So he came back on. So when the series ended, I said, how did I text him? He came back on. And all these guys were like, well, how'd you get him? I go, well, because I interviewed him before anyone knew, really, they knew who he was, but it was big. And I always tell people, you can get guests, but there's also, if you're going to get that big guest off the bat, you better be ready. I mean, I was nervous with Stephen Van Zandt. That was 2 years ago. I mean, I was 700 interviews under the belt. I'm a huge Springsteen fan. I like The Sopranos. And the thing is, you have to displace it. You can't make them feel like, hey, oh my God, it's Robbie. Robbie, I love you. No, you go, hey, I have David Duchovny on, and I love the show Californication. And Evan Handler was on Californication, and he was on like 6 months before. And he says, if Duchovny's ever on the show, and I didn't think I'd ever get Duchovny, he said, ask him this question about how I got the part. So I said to David, I said, I'm going to ask you a question no one has asked you. Evan Handler told me. Right then, David was like, oh, this guy's cool. He's not kissing my butt. He understands. And the thing is, I appreciate what my guests do. A lot of people do so much research and they ask these obscure questions. I call all my interviews, I call them organic chats. I just want to talk to people, especially if they've had if I had Lamal from Kajagoogoo, and I talked about that song, Too Shy to Shy, what it was like in college. It was one of those songs where it was slow then fast. So if a girl danced with you in the fast part and dancing the slow part, you probably were going to get a slow dance after that, and you might get lucky. And then he went on to tell a whole story, because I think a lot of these people, especially as you get older, that music's been around forever, and they appreciate the people, the stories, because that's what, to me, music is. There's a story behind the songs. And my original point was, all these guests have been nice. I have never met a jerk. And, because people have this predisposition, actors, musicians, a lot of them are just guys like us, man, just trying to make it. A lot of them people, so many of those 80s people got screwed by the record companies. I think in John Waite's documentary, he said he was on the Babies for 6 years, selling records. Well, after 6 years, he had $6,000 in his bank account. But people think they live in mansions, and until he wrote Missing You, and then it changed everything. But a lot of them, Martin Chambers from the Pretenders, I interviewed him, and he said, during the pandemic, he goes, we have to get on the road. I didn't write the music. These guys are guns for hire. And it's just crazy.
And there's two versions of the song, isn't there? There's their version and your version, how you perceive it, which is wonderful.
Oh, totally. And where they came from, right? And you hear some songs that you love, they just wrote like that. And, it's so fascinating. Songwriters are so fascinating. I mean, when you listen to like The Who, Bob O'Reilly, you hear the keyboards, and then at the end there's a violin. If you pitch it to someone, I'm going to start with this weird keyboard, then Townsend's going to sing sort of off key, and then there's going to be a violin. Record producers would be like, what? But it became a classic, and then that's what's great. And that's what's great when you talk to these people. They have good stories.
I mean, it's a fantastic show, and the guests are amazing on it, and they do open up to you. And I was listening, thinking this is great stuff. If people want to find the show, where's the best place to get it and find out about yourself if you're doing stand-up?
Okay, well, you can go to coopertalk.net. I'm on all the platforms, iTunes, all that, but go to coopertalk.net, because there's a picture of the artist. Because a lot of times people don't know who a musician is, especially with actors. They don't know who the actor's name is, but they go, oh, that guy was in The Sopranos. So go to coopertalk.net. You can follow me on Twitter at CooperTalk. I'm not really on that much anymore. Threads, I'm on at CooperTalk1, and Instagram at CooperTalk1. But I got Threads, and I don't really use it. And if you're on Facebook, follow Cooper Talk Radio. Or just add me. You got Steve Cooper. And if we have mutual friends, I'll add you. If not, I'm not going to add you. But because you never know nowadays. You get people add you, and you get some weird message. You go, what the hell? But Cooper Talk Radio. And then that's just follow that. And that's the best way to get in touch with me. And Cooper at coopertalk.net. You can email me.
Steve, it's been wonderful talking to you today, mate. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.